What's up, everybody, and welcome to Growing Up Gaming, your weekly podcast where we meet a new person of the internet to discuss their childhood with gaming and how it inspired their lives today. My name is Mitch Power. Again, thank you guys so much for returning each and every week to the show. Hope you're subscribing there on iTunes or Google Play or let's see what else. Spotify, YouTube, TuneIn Radio. Maybe you're catching me on a local AM station at 5 a.m. in the morning. I've hacked the radio station, so now I play it at 5 a.m. when nobody's listening to AM radio, but that's okay. This week on the show, we have our guest. His name is Jono Peck. I actually met this man through the help of Josh Brandt on Twitter. So he gets to discuss his history with gaming, as well as one of his favorite wrestling games, Story Mode, which is awesome. And I'm sorry if you don't like wrestling games, but you guys missed out because there were some pretty awesome wrestling games back in the day. If you guys want to be on the show just like he was, go ahead and send me a tweet at MitchPower1116 on Twitter or at the podcast Twitter page, which is at GUG Podcast on Twitter. Without further ado, let's get things started with Jono Peck. Do you remember what initially got you started playing games? Was it a family member? Was it a friend? Was it something you saw in a magazine? Like, what got you started?
So, man, I think games were just always around me, as weird as that might sound to... I mean, it probably doesn't sound weird to people these days, but I grew up in the 90s, so, I was born in 87, and as long as I can remember, there was some kind of game, whether it was, like, on a computer or, like, having a Sega... Mega Drive, which I think is the Genesis over in the US, which we got when I was probably like 6 or 7 years old. And from there, it was just a love affair, really, because I remember being told you have to go outside and play and wanting to, finish the Sonic the Hedgehog level or whatever the heck licensed game we had on Sega, because that's all they really had.
Yeah, and Sega's first party lineup wasn't super strong, but
man, it was all like Captain Planet and The Simpsons and like rip-offs of like parodies of James Bond and all these things. So that's pretty much all I remember.
Right. No, I mean, and it's funny because I think we're the only people that called it the Genesis, and everywhere else in the world it was the Mega Drive. So
yeah,
of course
I have to translate for the Americans.
Yeah,
but
every American was stupid. It. They're like, "What's a Mega Drive?" Like, we're the dumb ones who had to call it the Mega Drive, right? Like, just like everybody else is on the metric system, and we're the stupid ones. Like,
pretty much. I wasn't going to say it, but
no, that's fine. Why is it got to be dumb? Why can't we just have everybody? That it'd be really weird now if they did that shit. Like, no, you call this system the Xbox One, and everybody else calls it somebody else.
Oh yeah.
If that should happen now, people will be like, "What are you doing? Why are we doing this? This is stupid." Just like daylight savings time. It's stupid. It should be gone. Get rid of it. Nobody needs to do that shit anymore. Do you? I don't know if you guys know if you guys do that in Australia. Do you guys do that?
We do. It's
in Arizona where I live, we don't. Like the state just basically said that's fucking stupid, and they don't do it.
Yeah, we have one state here that doesn't. It's the sunniest state, so they probably don't really value their nighttime. Being outdoors as much as people who are usually stuck in the cold. But when it comes to summer, we're like, yeah, we want to enjoy this as much as possible.
Very true. Yeah, like for me, like where I'm in Arizona, where it's the sun and it's desert and it's 100 something degrees Fahrenheit in the summer all day, every day. So yeah, fun stuff. So, when it's like still hot at night for no reason, only because it was so hot during the day, the concrete was warm. Like that always threw me off. But so that was actually going to be one of my questions leading up, but you kind of answered it. So like, obviously you started out, you had a Mega Drive and everything, but your parents, were they cool about playing games, or were they definitely like, get out of the house and do something else with your life?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know. Like, it's hard to try and remember exactly what their perspective was, because like they didn't grow up with games. I know my dad had like I get confused whether it was a Commodore 64 or an Atari or something, but he had one of those machines basically that you could play like text-based adventures. And I remember him talking about playing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and getting stuck on like the very first screen. Like he just didn't know how to get through it because it was so obtuse and like specific back then. But so I remember him actually, when we first got the Mega Drive, we had to get him to like finish the level for us because we couldn't beat the boss. We couldn't beat Dr. Robotnik. So, I think he enjoyed I think they both enjoyed seeing us have so much fun with it, but at the same time it was, like, you have to finish your chores, or you have to go outside and play for a bit. And, when you're kids, that's fun, but it's kind of when you get older and you realize that video games are the best, and like that's the best way to spend your school holidays or
right.
the weekends, that it's like, really, do I have to go outside? But yeah, I think it was always like that they recognized that we appreciated, that we enjoyed it so much. They appreciated that we enjoyed it so much. But it's only really like the recent years where I've started to podcast and kind of do a bit of writing. Like was fortunate to get an article published on IGN earlier this year, and my mum was like, wow, like this makes me appreciate and understand why you love games so much, like the way that they speak to you and have like been an important part of your life. Like I think it finally clicked that it's an industry that we follow and not just a hobby, like, like board games, or like some people are passionate about board games, but like, you know what I mean?
No, right. No, I get it. And yeah, I mean, especially when you have something tangible and be like, hey mom, remember those video games that you thought were just like a toy or whatever? Like, no, look, like they've actually gotten to the point where it's gotten me, look at this writing job I did. That's pretty amazing. Like that video games have gotten to the point where you're able to write and have, articles on other websites and everything. So that's pretty amazing. Like the only thing I got out of it was a podcast. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm on like cool shows and shit. Like I just do a podcast. So, I mean, I've been on some shows, but nothing like, hey, be a guest on IGN. They've only said my name on IGN podcast when I've wrote in. That's it. Like,
well, that's something.
That's something, right? I remember that happened. Like I was on Podcast Unlocked because I'm a big Xbox guy, and one of my buddies was like, did I just hear your fucking name on the Podcast Unlocked thing? I'm like, yeah, you did. And he's just like, dude, that's really cool.
It's funny, isn't it? Like it's it's not just being able to be part of these things, but we're in these communities now, and that's pretty cool when you can tell your parents, like, I've got friends all around the world. Like I'm talking to you right now in Arizona, and it's because of video games. Essentially, that's what it is. But when you're listening to a podcast from whoever and you hear like, oh, and here's our Patreon question for the week, and it's this guy, and you're like, hey, I know that guy.
Yeah, hey, I've heard that guy's name before.
It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, thankfully because of the internet, like we're able to talk. Like again, video games will draw people all over the place. Like my wife she likes video games, right? She plays video games with me. She gets excited about certain video games. But like when I tell her, when I go do a podcast and I record, talk to the person for like 2 hours, she goes, I don't get how you can just talk to a random person you don't know about video games for 2 hours. I'm like, it's really easy when you both love them. Like when you both have a passion for them, it's really not hard. It's just like any other hobby. Like if you find out, oh, you're into sports, me too. You're into this team, me too. You're into this, me too. Like it's really not that hard to go nonstop about it. But same thing, like my brother-in-law is really big into video games. So whenever me and him, if it's me, my wife, and my brother-in-law in a room, me and him just start talking about video games, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I can't get away from this. It's just like, that's what always happens.
It's so true. It's so true. Like we've probably spent, I don't know, an hour talking before you hit record with this compared to like combined with the last time we tried to do a podcast before an interruption came in. But exactly. there's never been like any awkward pauses or lapse in conversation because we've just been talking about Red Dead Redemption and Fallout and game sharing and like all these things that are second nature to us because we love this, this industry so much that it's never hard to talk to someone that shares your passion. It's
right.
Great.
And that's why I like doing this show because like I want to make sure I talk to people because everybody's how they came up is different. Especially when I talk to people that didn't grow up in the United States like I did. Like that's the big thing because I'm like I don't know shit about how it was with you guys. I don't know if gaming was as mainstream, if it was as accepted, if it was as widely available, like those are just different things that, I love talking about. So it's really not that hard and everything. Hey, anybody, if you want to be on the show, go ahead and send me a tweet. It's okay. We can talk about video games just like we are right now.
It's funny you say that. Like it really wasn't like it is now. Like I remember I had a friend that had an NES. And I had friends who didn't have any consoles, so we always just played games on their computer. But it was so different, like compared to now where I imagine every household has some kind of console or setup.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it too, and like I said, this has been in the States or whatever, just like, again, it just depends on the environment you grew up in. I was in a situation where I didn't grow up very well off, right? Like my family, I wouldn't say it was poor, but we definitely didn't have much money. And as far as it goes with like the Nintendo, for example, I remember the NES being like a thing that everyone had for whatever, like, and it didn't matter if you played games or not. Like, it was everywhere, and it was almost like a VCR. It was just like, oh, hey, we have a, we have VCR. Oh, we have a Nintendo in the room for the kids. So when like adults would have a party, they'd be like, oh yeah, there's just a Nintendo in there. You kids go have fun or whatever.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was just like that seemed to be like all over the place, and it seemed just to be in homes where you didn't even expect video games to even be in.
I feel like it wasn't until the PS1 and 64 generation here that it became that ubiquitous. Like, I remember specifically the kids at school who had a SNES or they had a Sega. Like, I actually don't know if anyone else had a Sega Mega Drive. It might have just been our family. But we had friends that would come over and they'd be like, oh, like, we get to play the Sonic or whatever, or Bubsy, because they had a Nintendo and they'd always want to play ours. And whenever we went to their house, even though it was like a generation behind, we'd always want to play the NES because there were different games.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, too. As long as you had, like, a buddy who had the other one, you never felt like you were left out and stuff. So, obviously, you went Mega Drive and everything, and you got to enjoy the plethora of Sonic 1 and 2 and 3 and a bunch of licensed games. Like, do you remember what games specifically stuck out to you for that console?
Yeah, there's a Dick Tracy game that was actually pretty good. It was cool because you could, like, it was a platformer, so you could shoot in front of you, but then there was a button you could press and it would shoot in the background. So there were enemies on two different planes. So that was kind of cool for the time. And I remember, like, you could also shoot up, you had a Tommy gun and you could shoot up the background and smash all the windows. And I've always been, like, obsessed with damage, like environmental damage in games since then. At the end of the level, there'd be like a no damage bonus. And I never got it because I just love breaking all the windows and everything.
Who wants that bonus? That's not fun. You don't want to go around being polite.
To this day, like, one of the things that I love to do in, like, whether it's a new GTA or whatever, is to just, like, get a car and smash it up and watch the deterioration of all the different parts and how realistic it is, and whether the door falls off or the hood flies over your head. Like, there's just, if you could, someone needs to do like a through the years car smashing video on YouTube or something, because it's been it's one of the best indicators of the hardware's power, I think, is how realistic those things can be.
Oh yeah, I bet you're loving Crackdown 3 right now.
I haven't touched it. I'm a PlayStation guy.
I'll send you a video of Crackdown 3. They have a way back, because Crackdown 3 has only been talked about for, I don't know, 5 years. But they initially talked about how they're doing like a cloud service where basically they're doing destruction in the cloud to where you can literally level an entire building. And I'm talking next level destruction. Like, it looks fucking crazy with the amount of detail and destruction that you can do. Just like, I'm not kidding you, this past Saturday, and again, this tells you how, when we recorded it, but they announced this new mode called Wrecking Zone, which is basically 5v5, but the entire environment is all destructible. And it is some of the craziest, most detailed destruction I've ever seen of a city, and it's really cool, but that just shows you some of the stuff. And apparently my buddy was talking about how Battlefield 5 is supposed to be, like, really good as well.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say what's funny, though, is, like, I'm trying to think of what games. Like, GTA definitely is that type of game where I remember the one thing that broke my head, and I just was like, this is next. This is where it went next gen, was when 4 happened on 360. And I remember if you went too fast, and it's not even a damage, but it's just a little thing. When you're going too fast in a car and you hit a wall, you flew out the windshield. And I was like, okay, this is really cool. Like,
that was bad, yeah. Not wearing a seatbelt.
Yeah, no, apparently Nico never wore a seatbelt ever.
And I think that was, I don't know if it was that or 5, where you would get onto a motorbike and if you paused long enough, he would reach down and put on a helmet.
Yeah, that's in 5. Yeah, because he does that all the time. Like, that's when you know you've been sitting there too long. He actually is like, all right, I guess I'll get a helmet on. But yeah, even in 5, like, you get hit in certain directions and your car starts veering in that direction. And it's just like, you know, but the thing is, though, is that if you think about it, for the most part, especially I would say starting with PS1 era, car games have always been the game that shows off how graphically good your game can look.
Yes, that's
it's
right.
always driving games. And I mean,
It's because they don't have to worry about like facial expressions and models and that kind of thing.
Right, so they just kind of make it look as good as they can, just the vehicle. I remember looking at games like Gran Turismo back on PS1 and just going, holy shit, this looks real. And I mean...
Colin McRae Rally was one that we had.
Like, I mean, I was like, this is cool and all, but now, like, you look at, like, Forza Horizon 4 and you're just like, Jesus Christ. Like, now it's all weather. They're like, let's just make the weather good. Like, make it look as good as I remember Drive Club even though it didn't sell that well on PlayStation or whatever, but I remember, like, the rain and, like, how the rain looked on the camera behind the car, how it was, like, the rain was moving on the lens like it would a car. I was like, holy shit, man. Like, that game looks really good.
Yeah, there is a cool video comparing, like, rain in games over the different generations, but getting sidetracked. Dick Tracy, that was one. I remember, like, there was a Simpsons game where, like, you couldn't even select which mini game you wanted to play. It was on, like, a dial, and he'd spin around, and then you'd play that. Maybe it was Bart versus, like, the Aliens or Bart's Nightmare. It was one of those crappy licensed games that.
Yeah, I just looked up
Sega
Genesis Simpsons, and, like, Bart's Nightmare was one of them. Bart versus the Space Mutants.
Yeah, that's probably the one.
Good Lord.
I can't remember. Yeah, like, there's so many. We had a Captain Planet video game that was like a different character had like that you had to free them. Oh, it was a wild time.
There was some good licensed games that happened, but then of course like there was a point in time when like licensed games were either really really good or just straight trash. Like most of your Disney games, your Lion Kings, Aladdin's, those were fun. I remember there was a Toy Story game. That was back when they first started doing the, like, I won't say 3D, but it was like a 2D game, but it looked 3D model-ish. So it was like better looking, because like similar to what they did with Donkey Kong Country, how it like had that different like art style to it.
Yes, yeah, I know what you mean.
But
I think the thing with, like I always say when I talk about this console that it was about licensed games, but then I think maybe it was just they were the ones that we gravitated to because we had something to connect to it, because there weren't like reviews like there are now. There weren't magazines that we were getting for that generation. So we didn't have anything to go on other than the box art. And, there was a few games like Cool Spot, and there was one called Bonanza Bros and James Pond, which was obviously like a parody of James Bond.
Right.
But they like usually like, and I'm talking about all these games, most of the ones that we played were actually ones that we went to the video store and rented for a weekend, because it was only $5 versus the 40 or 50 or whatever it was to buy something that you weren't even sure was going to be good. So yeah, I think that we probably just gravitated towards, I know The Simpsons or I know Ghostbusters, so I'll give that a crack.
Well, the other thing too, though, is that a lot, I mean, I don't know. So, like, that was going to say, because you mentioned you didn't really have magazines. I remember magazines around that time, but they were basically glorified ad books. Like, they were just advertisements. And it was, again, though, it was just, and like you said, though, the licensed games were just something to gravitate towards because it's like, hey, I like Power Rangers. Oh, there's a Power Rangers video game. Sold. And like you said, some of them were, like, all the Disney ones, for whatever reason, were good. Like, they just knew what the hell they were doing, so they were awesome. But then, like, there were certain licensed games that were just complete trash, like, just so bad. And again, you got burned on it because you were like, oh, I love this. This should be a good video game, and it just doesn't translate well at all. But the other thing, too, is, like, Sega tried so many different IPs, and just, like, they didn't work. Like, they had Sonic, which worked, obviously, because Sonic was, like, their bread and butter for their first-party shit. But then they had, like, I remember so many like of those Sega exclusive games trying to get in, like, this will be good, like Comic Zone, Vector Man, other games like Toe Jam and Earl and stuff were on there. But I mean, like, for example, I remember Vector Man, I was like, this is gonna be the coolest game ever. He can transform into different things, and like it was okay. And they made a second one, but I remember them not making as big of a deal. But I remember like Comic Zone as well. Like Comic Zone, did you ever play that?
No.
So basically Comic Zone, and of course it's a 90s storyline where basically a guy draws comic books and then lightning strikes and his comic comes to life and he gets pulled into his comic. And it was such a cool concept because everything was like, the hand-drawn style, but like each little section was just the panels. So like there was areas where you could choose what panel you want to go to next. The only problem is like I played it now and it's trash. It's just a really bad game. Like you can find it on like a Game Pass or a game collection of like, you know, stuff like that, but it's just not that great of a game. Like obviously certain games hold up better than others, and that definitely doesn't. But again, back then I was just like, man, this is such a cool game, and hoping that, you know, Sega would do more with some of those. But like, again, then it was always your licensed games. But then also there was that craze of like arcade games going to Genesis, you know, NBA Jam, Mortal Kombat, and that took over shit for a while too. So, did you ever have any siblings to play games with or anything?
Yeah, I got an older brother who's only a year ahead, so we played a lot of multiplayer games. Like I remember playing, I mentioned Bonanza Bros, which is basically like just a platforming shoot 'em up. We played like Jordan versus Bird.
Yep.
And we played Space Jam. Was Space Jam on PS1? No, yeah, I think that was a bit later. But yeah, like we played a lot of games together when we could, and that was definitely a bonding thing for us over the next decade or so.
Yeah, I was gonna say, man, like having a brother that's only like 1 year older is almost perfect. Like it's almost like a friend in your same grade. Like it's just like, you know what I mean? Like for the most part, you're into the same stuff. Yeah. Obviously, sometimes you're into different things, but I mean, that's like almost like the perfect age to have like a brother or something, just super similar age to be having similar interests.
Yeah, you take it in lives or levels. So if you died, you pass the controller over, or if you beat the level, you'd pass it over as well. So that was the way we played.
Yeah, exactly. That's nothing wrong with that. I just looked up Space Jam video game, and it was PlayStation era, which is weird, but I guess that's the case because it was 96.
Yeah.
Like,
again, which makes me think Toy Story probably was PS1 as well. I don't know if
Toy Story. No, I remember Toy Story did come out on Genesis. Because
it must have been very late.
It was it was a super late Genesis game. I remember that. Like it was, again, it was like it came out in 95. Like it was a very late Genesis game. But I mean, like I said, that was around the time when they had that 3D model-esque look to it. And like I said, it basically had the exact same art style as Donkey Kong's Country. So that type of art style and stuff. So then did you have friends at school and everything to kind of have a common interest with games and stuff? Or were you kind of like I won't say the lone person playing games, but was it like as many kids in your school and everything that were into it?
Not really. It was mostly like there was a couple good friends that I had that I mentioned they had the NES, so we'd play with them, and then I had other friends who we'd go to their place and play Commander Keen on the PC, and we'd play a bunch of those, like, I don't know if they're like free games, like Return Fire, which is capture the flag with jeeps and tanks and helicopters.
Right.
But yeah, like there was always, there must have been games that came with a computer back then, or some kind of package where you get like 20 games.
Yeah, because I mean, that was a big deal, like back then, like computers, because they sold computers in like bundle sets, like computer, monitor, keyboard, mouse, and then like 30 random ass games, and it was. And
they were awesome fun, like, and even with those like Genesis games that, you know, common. What's the term I'm looking for? Like, the consensus basically is that they were all terrible, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so many of those were pretty bad.
Like at the time, we loved them. Like we didn't realize they were bad. It's only thinking back about how unmemorable they are that we realized that so many of those design choices didn't make sense. But you didn't think about like that when you were a kid. But the same with these PC games, like spending hours playing battle chess, which is basically chess but with actual avatars as each character. Like the king was an actual guy and the queen was a woman, and the rooks, the castles would turn into these monsters, and they would battle each other when you took their piece, and there was different animations for each one, and it was so much fun to see the different combinations, because you know the knights killing a queen would be a different little gag compared to the king who would like make out with her and then stab her in the back or whatever it was. And it was hilarious, and we would spend so much time just playing that kind of thing. So it's funny to think of kids like my nephew who plays Rocket League and Fortnite, and he's 5 or 6 years old, and compared to what we had, it's a good time to be a kid. But I'm glad that we got to see the progression. Yeah, really.
I mean, yeah, that's dude. My son, he's getting the best of everything, you know. Like, and obviously, like I said, games. The other thing too, though, is like people. I'm not going to say people were still figuring out how to do games, but like nobody had a formula down. Like, you know what I mean? There was like, I mean, the biggest thing is, and it sounds so stupid, is just things like jumping, right? Mario had the perfect jump. perfect. It was perfect.
Yeah. I think we've come to realize that there were a few games at the time that knew what they were doing, like Mega Man. Those games I've come to love in recent years, and they were all NES games, and they all came out within like 5 or 6 years. And the Mario games, the classics, they hold up, that you can still play them, and there's not really major problems in those games, like compared to something like Sonic or whatever, where you can go, I can see what they were thinking at the time, but they're clearly breaking these fundamental rules that we've come to accept as time goes on. But, Mega Man and Mario didn't really do that. So it is cool that you can look back and reflect on those guys really knew what they were doing. They were ahead of the curve,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, too, is, again, they were still experimenting with games. They were experimenting with different things. And, of course, then they started segmenting, especially when they got to the 64 era, expansion packs. I mean, they were still just trying to throw new ideas out and see what happened. And you get those games that try different things, let's see how, if we make the jump a little floatier, do people like that better? And then literally it all boils down to, real fast, Mario's got the perfect jump, just make that. And it sounds as dumb as it is. It sounds really stupid that it's something as simple as a jump can make your game better. But there are games where you play it and the jump, you're just ugh.
You're right. I was at PAX Australia a couple of weeks ago, and there's a retro area, and I was playing Alex Kidd in the bundled in game on the Master System for Sega. And the jump, instantly, straight up the jump, I was just oh, this is not good. This is bad. I remember this.
Yeah, some jumps are super floaty. I remember, some people hating Little Big Planet because the jump is, insane floaty. And it's just again, you just got to find a good mix of things. But, yeah, there's certain games that definitely got it and they just nailed it right away. And like I said, that's where, as you get older, you appreciate it. But now we have 30-plus years of constant game development to make sure that things are better now. So, I mean, again, all of our kids and, my kids and your kids and all that are going to end up getting games that are, developed by people who have gone through the hard times and figured out the ways to make it better. So, yeah, games like Rocket League, that game's amazing, dude. If you had Rocket League, and I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with the games that we had back then. Some of the games, the only problem is some of those games, you have nostalgia glasses on, so you'll think, the game was way better than it was, and then you go back and play it, and you're like, God, this game actually really wasn't good. Because that's what happened with me at Comic Zone. I remember just loving it, and then, it came on Xbox Game Pass, and I was like, yes, I'm going to go back and play Comic Zone, and literally I was like, I can't do this. I'm going to ruin this game for me forever. But as a kid, I was like, this game is the shit. This game is amazing. Yeah, no, it's not that good of a game.
There's a bunch of games like that where I'm reluctant to go back and play because I love them so much. Marvel Ultimate Alliance on the PS2 is a game that me and my brother played so much, and it's such a awesome. I wish they would remake that. I know they've released it, but I wish they would remake that as a current generation Avengers game with that style of pick whichever character you want to be and go through the level. It's kind of like It's basically what the Lego games are, but at the time it was before Lego. So you could go through a level, there'd be cutscenes, great voice acting, and every character had their own powers, and it was so good. But yeah, no way. I don't really want to go back and see what it's like now because I'm not sure if it would.
You mentioned that, and I used to work at a video game store, and I remember Marvel Ultimate Alliance being such a big deal. people losing their shit. They're like, no, you don't get, because that was also back when
it was before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it was that was that game was literally my introduction to a lot of characters like Deadpool, who now are huge, box office draws. But at the time, people didn't even know who they were. I certainly didn't. And this was 2005 or 2006.
Yeah, and I remember people making a big deal, but also I think at that time there was a style of game, there was Champions of Norath, there was Baldur's Gate, there was Diablo-esque style games, but then when you add Marvel to it, people were like, what?
It was like Gauntlet. It was kind of like the original Gauntlet.
Yeah. And there's just that, and then what's funny is, obviously my wife is really big in Diablo. We play Diablo 3 quite a bit. And when the Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2 went on sale for Xbox, which is really sad because they actually got delisted recently, which is really bumming. I was like, well, that kind of sucks. But I actually played, because I never played them. I just got to a point where I was like, back then I was like, yeah, I heard they're good, but I'm playing other shit right now. I just can't play it. So then me and her started playing it, and like comparing that to how like Diablo 3 is fine-tuned that type of gameplay, and then going and playing Marvel Ultimate Alliance, I'm like, ooh, like it's not. Again, back then I'm sure this was the shit, and this was next level, and this was amazing. But now it's like it's not terrible, but it's also like there's certain things when we play it, and I'm like, man, I wish I had this like Diablo does, or I wish it was just a little bit smoother here. And like you're right though, if they did like with the quality of stuff that they have now, if they had like a full-fledged Avengers game and that was it, and it was like that type of, you know, especially with couch co-op and all that, that game would fucking sell like crazy.
It'd be amazing.
It would be amazing.
And I'm sure it will happen as well. Like it's, even if it was just like, you know, that Lara Croft Temple of Osiris where it was basically just running around and solving a puzzle, like you could just do that with Marvel. I know that they're probably a bit precious about what they lend their IP to after so many bad tie-ins, movie tie-ins and that kind of thing, but I think that you could get the right team on that and it would sell so well. Like, look how well DC Universe Online did, and that wasn't even, you know, I guess a AAA product.
Right. Well, what my big thing is, I like how certain companies, for example, which Star Wars, I'm not going to say fucked up, but like when Star Wars went exclusive to EA, it's the same thing that Marvel did back in the day with Activision. Like, they just gave their game to Activision, and then Activision kind of found studios that made it work. Whereas now Marvel is straight like, no, we own our shit, and we're going to go to individual studios ourselves to find people who make a game. Example, Spider-Man.
Yes.
They literally found Insomniac, who was probably one of the best people that could have made a Spider-Man game. Like, think about just like all the shit they've done and stuff, all the crazy things they've done. When they came out with Sunset Overdrive, like the traversal, like when, like for example, it sounds stupid, but like they nailed down traversing a huge city in that game. And there was no web, but there was like grinding on power wires and running on walls and jumping and doing all this. And as soon as I heard Spider-Man and Insomniac, I was like, dude, traversing the city as Spider-Man is going to be fucking amazing. And I cannot wait for it. But now, like I said, like they go to different studios. So they're like, oh, you're good at this type of game? Like, cool. Here's this. We want you to do this with this license, this type of game. So that's a way better formula than going to that. And I mean, like game studios, that's kind of what they did back in the day. But the only thing I found weird is like some studio or some games, even though it was the same IP, were actually made by like two different companies. And that's why the games were so different between Genesis and Super Nintendo. Like, it's really weird that some of those things happen sometimes like that. But yeah, I mean, there's certain games out there though. I would love to see, like, if Blizzard got its hands on a Marvel license and they were like, we just want you to make Diablo, but do it with Marvel characters.
Yeah.
Like, the internet would explode. The internet would freak the fuck out if they did that. And, you know, they're doing cool tie-ins here and there, and I know they're supposed, Square, from what I've been told, is supposed to be doing an Avengers game. But I don't know what it's in the vein of, right? I don't know if it's meant to be like a third-person action game, like a Tomb Raider-style game. I don't know if it's meant to be role-playing, Final Fantasy-esque-ish type of game. I don't know what they're trying to do with it, but I know that they have an Avengers license. So
Avengers Go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what they'll do. They'll just do Avengers Go. But no, I mean, like, there's certain companies that can do that. But yeah, EA with the Star Wars license, that's the only thing that's weird too, because again, that's what they did before. They were like, as a company, you have this license. Now you figure out which of your studios are going to do these things. And I'm like, it's not a bad thing, but it's just better when you have like a lot more options. So even Telltale did the same thing. Like Guardians, they were like, here's Guardians. You do good story-based games, do that. And too bad that shit's not happening anymore, but...
Yeah. And Guardians wasn't a good Telltale game either.
Which is... It's just weird. I don't know. Like,
you're right. Like, I can imagine them thinking, like, no-brainer, we'll give this to Telltale. But it just wasn't good.
Yeah. I think... and that's the other thing, too, is, like, some game... Like, Telltale, for example, just took on so many damn games. Like, knock it off, dude. Just, like... do a couple. Like you had a Minecraft game, and then a Borderlands game, and a Game of Thrones game, and then Guardians, and then Stranger Things was like a thing you had right at the end, and then Walking Dead. Like,
Batman. Yeah.
Batman. Oh shit, Batman. Like, like that's what I'm saying. How bad is it? I forgot all these. I named all the ones that were crazy, and then and there was Batman too. Like, oh yeah, I forgot about Batman.
And Michonne, and
yeah, like it's just like crazy that some companies do that and they overstretch themselves, and unfortunately bad shit happens. But it's okay. Yeah, let's make another Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Let's just make that hashtag happen, and then that'll make its way there. As far as it goes with as you progress, though, so obviously you didn't go with a Sega Saturn because you'd be ridiculous. So obviously it sounds like you went PlayStation, right?
Yeah. So I have a very specific memory walking into my grandparents' house for Christmas one year, and like they live in a different city, so every time we go there, it was like a big thing, and all the family gathers from around the country. And I walked in, and everyone was gathered around the TV, and my uncle was playing Crash Bandicoot. It was like the Hog Wild level, and he had just got this console. It must have been 1996. And I was like, wow, this is it. This is the new generation. So from there, I think it was probably the following June or something, my dad bought himself PlayStation 1 for his birthday, but really it was for us. Like he had Formula 197. That was a game that got to play with it, and we just spent so many hours on the demo disc, and that was all we needed to entertain ourselves. Oh man, demo discs, bring those back. Tekken 2 had like Die Hard Trilogy, Abe's Odyssey, just so much fun in that
Die
one
Hard
disc.
Trilogy was like a thing, like just I don't know, just like Die Hard Trilogy, because at the time Die Hard with a Vengeance I think maybe just came out, and I was just like, yeah, let's just throw 1 and 2 in there as well. I didn't even play, like, what type of game was Die Hard Trilogy?
So there was 3 games in that thing, which was kind of what made it cool. And the demo only had one of them, but there was a car racing one, or maybe it was like a Crazy Taxi type deal where you were driving around and, like, I don't know if it was racing or like trying to hit certain points.
3, obviously.
Yeah, and then there was there was like a third-person action one, and there was a on-rails shooter, which was the one that we played from the demo, and it was so much fun because it would take you through like an airport, and you'd unload a clip of bullets on someone, and then you'd have a grenade and you could throw, and there was destructible environments. It was like a Time Crisis type deal, but
gotcha.
With the Die Hard kind of Bruce Willis voiceovers and that kind of thing. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah,
especially for kids who were probably too young to play something like that. Oh
yeah, I remember watching Die Hard with a Vengeance, and I was just like, obviously I wasn't old enough to be watching it. And again, it's not even like it's a violent movie, just language in it. You're like, well, Samuel L. Jackson's in it, but still, like you're like, holy shit, like this movie is one. It was one of those like I'm not gonna say the first R-rated movies, like, but one of those like as I was getting to that age where my dad was like, I think you're cool to start watching these. And I remember that being like one of the first ones I watched. And every time it's on, it's one of those movies that's weird because like every time it's on, I'll just stop and watch it. I'm like, nah, Die Hard with a Vengeance is on. But if 2's on, no one gives a fuck. But if like Die Hard with a Vengeance is on, everyone like seems like, yeah, this one's really good. And then afterwards, all those other ones started to suck too. Like, it's like 1, 3, and then every other one's like, they're okay. But that happens. And then, so obviously Crash, dude, also too, talk about a game that'll just burst your bubble. Crash 1 is not good.
I did not buy the remaster.
Don't, because I just realized like it's just, again though, it's not even like,
it is what it is. Like it's a nostalgic thing to go back to. Like for example, my wife didn't grow up a gamer. Like I think they might have got a Wii. That was probably the first console that her home had.
Right.
And she's 5 years younger than me as well, so it's a different generation in terms of like growing up with consoles. But I think, Crash Bandicoot was one, whether it was a friend of hers or whatever, but she has memories of playing that as a kid. So she was pretty keen to play that when we visited someone that had the remake.
Yeah, like that game, I'm not going to see, here's the problem though, is like, again, you say the game is bad, but you're also comparing it to what? Like games now? Like a lot of games are bad that used to not be, but now there's a better version of platformers. So, I mean, that's the hard part is like when it comes to older games. And I think the hardest ones, hands down, are that PS1 and 64 like generation. Cause they just graphically, they're jarring. They were still figuring out 3D, so either the jumping sucks or the camera sucks or both.
The camera is the main problem with Crash, I think.
Yeah.
Just having to like run towards the camera or away from the camera.
What kind of fucking sense does that make, running towards the camera when like you don't know what's coming? Like it's really and again, it keeps you on your toes and stuff, but I mean again, like you look back on it and go, who approved that part? Like, who thought, run towards it? Running away from the boulder.
They were working with a new dimension. They had no, basis to... They came up with that in a vacuum, really.
Right, exactly. So. And again, who got it right? Mario 64.
Yeah. There'd be no arguments even from the Sony fanboy inside me about that.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I was a PlayStation kid, but, when you played Mario 64, you're like, this just feels perfect. It feels fucking perfect. It feels right.
There's a great article from Colin Moriarty on IGN about, it's the history of Naughty Dog, but talking to them about developing Crash as a 3D game without there being one before it and not really having anything to go off. They just, it's like if you put someone in a room that's like a kid in a room and close the door and they keep them in there like a dungeon, are they going to come up with, give them a pen and a pad, and what are they going to come up with? It's only... our own experiences that form our imagination and influence what we can come up with. But, you compare that person to someone else and they're going to come up with something completely different. And Nintendo obviously had the person with the better idea. And I think when Naughty Dog saw Mario 64, they were like, oh, we could do that. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Exactly. I mean, again, it's just weird because you try to mimic those types of things. And it's just so odd because you could see something and it's like example, when it comes to drawing, just drawing, I suck, right? I'm not good. But I mean, I look at something and go, yeah, I could copy that. But if I try to copy what they had, it would come out completely different. It would just suck. There would be parts of it that aren't good. So it's just weird because I'm not going to say you can't really say there's so many quote unquote original video games. Cause I mean, you could say, every side scrolling platformer is a ripoff of Mario. Well, no shit. It was just one of the better first ones that were out. You know what I mean? That's the problem is it's hard to say a new genre. A new genre is a very big deal. Cause those, like I said, most things are just this plus this or whatever. No, when a new genre comes out, you're like, holy shit. But with Mario, when Mario 64 came out, people played it and was probably this is amazing. Let's make something like this. And then they could try and just couldn't for whatever reason.
Not many managed to pull it off, yeah. And I think it's a thing that you mentioned about coming up with something new. These days to invent a genre, it's almost impossible. But right. even at that console, the PS1, there was still a lot of new things people could do. And I think that was an exciting time because you were experiencing new genres that you'd never seen before. Like you mentioned, platformers all being a variation of Mario, but I remember playing Abe's Odyssey, Oddworld game, and being like, oh wow, the character is talking to the other characters, and that's a gameplay mechanic that's controlling them, and you're able to interact, and that's a huge element of this game,
Of course,
and
yeah.
Hello, follow me, and then you save them, and that was wow, I can actually control other people on the screen, not just my character, but other people. And that was pretty mind-blowing to me as a 11-year-old kid.
Yeah, I remember Oddworld, but I remember too again, it was just weird because that game was just so big. And I don't remember, again, it was just one of those to have a new IP back then, I'm not going to say be big, but to a point where you're like, holy shit, this is really crazy. And it, obviously, games like Mario and Zelda and all those games had that lineage of the consoles before it. But a lot of those PS1 games, when they came out, to have that kind of strong of an impact, Crash Bandicoot was the PlayStation mascot. Mm. And it wasn't even a PlayStation owned thing. It was, yeah, exactly. And it's just crazy.
There were so many mascots though, between Abe and Lara Croft and the Dance Revolution character, the Buster Move characters, and Solid Snake eventually.
I think PlayStation just had their mascot, whoever was selling best that year. There's which one's the most popular one? Let's make them a mascot, put them in a commercial.
Yeah. Spyro, Croc, Gex, probably.
Oh my god, Croc and Gex. Oh my god, those feel like second rate, Crash and Spyro, Croc and Gex. But dude, Gex the Gecko, man, that guy had 3 or 4 games, and I'm sure they sold well enough to keep making them and more. Croc was probably the last one. For Croc, I think had 1 and 2, and it was just
Croc's got a lot of fans. Like, you know how people are hyped about these Spyro remakes. There's a lot of people like, yeah, where's Croc, Legend of the Gobbos?
Jesus
or the Yobbos or whatever.
Where are they? I haven't seen one.
Oh man, my Twitter feed. There's been some Croc love.
Well, dude, just like I saw like Bubsy, I was like, dude, get out of here with that shit, dude. No one is asking for that.
The Bubsy on the Mega Drive was probably one of our favorite games to play on that console. But we've moved on from there. Yeah,
that's
Medieval was another one. Yeah.
So that's the thing is like certain games too. It's weird because like certain games I felt like got a chance on PlayStation, and then like if it didn't sell extremely well, they didn't really give a shit about it. But Medieval was actually one of those games I was like, dude, this game is fun, and I think they had 1 and 2, and that's it. Like they just stopped, and I don't know if it was just at the time like other genres were opening up and like they were trying to take a different direction rather than just doing that. But Medieval was fun, so when they were talking about doing like a remake of it, I was like, that could be actually pretty cool, especially with how good graphics can look now and how much more detail you can put into like the character and stuff and like, animation and modeling. I'm like, dude, you guys could make this way awesome. So I heard that and I was down. When I heard the Crash like remake, I heard, because me, for example, I was more big into Crash 3, which was like where they started getting better with it. You know, they ironed out some shit and they had more things besides just the side-scrolling stuff. And I had fun with that, but then I remember like Crash 1, I was like, yeah, dude, Crash 1 was that fun. Spyro, again, not a terrible game, but like you could definitely tell Spyro 1 was like the test dummy, and they're like, all right, and then 2 and 3 came out and were probably way better, but who knows? Like, again, it's just over time, though. That's always the case. Over time, games are going to get better. The biggest example I've ever seen is Assassin's Creed.
Oh, yeah. I remember playing the first one, and when it came out to PlayStation 3, I think it was like a year or two after it hit Xbox, I think. But when I played it, it was like, I see what they're doing. I see how this is a huge step, but it's missing something because I feel like I'm just going to the quest giver and then I'm doing the quests. And where like at that point we'd already played like GTA San Andreas, so we knew that there was something more out there and that this was the prettier version, and they had added some mechanics like the whole stealth elements and being able to blend in
with the crowd,
cut the cutscenes being a huge step forward from the previous console generation. But it was just missing that life that comes with an open world. And
then 2 happened and everybody's like, wow. Like, everybody's like, holy shit, look at this game. Like,
and it was kind of, it was like, holy cow, but it was also like, yes, this is what we wanted. Like, we could have told them exactly what we wanted, and that was it, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that was definitely, and it's funny because like other games, like I think Ubisoft is like, you know, when you get a pancake mix, you make one that's like your tester, you're like, all right, that's how it's going to be. All right, cool. And then you make the other ones and they're good. I seem like Ubisoft has that like first pancake out. Watch Dogs 1. Okay. You guys got the idea, right? All right, cool. Watch Dogs 2, way better. Like, just way better in every way. Assassin's Creed, same thing. Division, I'm sure will be the same thing. Like, they're just like,
I hope so. Like, I love the Division, but I played the Division 2 at PAX a couple of weeks ago, and like it actually does just kind of feel like the first one with a new setting, with some new enemies, and hopefully that's enough to make it, you know, with maybe a few surprises thrown in there, whether it's the campaign or a few elements that they haven't shown off yet. I think that the gameplay itself feels so much like the first one that I'm not sure it is going to be that huge evolution, but hopefully we'll see.
We'll see. I mean, they still got a couple months and everything for them to figure it out. And it's weird because some games apparently, like, one of my friends was telling me how Battlefield 5, he played the beta, and he's just like, I'm not feeling this game. Like, I don't get why, but it's just something doesn't feel right about it. I'm not down for it. And then, like, that same dude just texted me when the EA Access version of Battlefield, he's like, dude, this game is really good. I don't know what the hell they did in, like, 4 months, but this game feels so much better. I'm like, well, that's encouraging, because, again, now the betas are figuring out what people hate and figuring out what's broken and fixing it, and it's a good thing when the game comes back and it's like, no, this game is actually like good. They fixed a lot of shit, so that's always good.
I mean, the beta's it's like the new demo disc in
exactly,
some ways.
Yeah. Speaking of demo discs, Yeah, dude, PlayStation 1 demo disc. I had mentioned it before on like a previous show, but like there's times where I lived off demo discs. Like I didn't give a fuck to play any other game. I was just like, I got this Tony Hawk and Metal Gear demo disc. Like I'm good.
That was me, man. Like I had the subscription to the PlayStation magazine, and it was probably the first console where I feel like I had a good understanding of like almost every game that came out, because every month you'd get the demo with at least 10 games on it, and you get to taste them all. And the ones that you really loved, obviously you go out and buy or you rent or whatever. But like my most played games on PS1, like the top 10, 3 or 4 of them would probably be demos. Like I played, like you said, Tony Hawk, Metal Gear Solid, played so much of those games, and it's like Smackdown. Yep. And a lot of them I went on to buy, but you know, you could play some of those demos for a month at the time, because maybe it was coming out of like the Sega generation, the Nintendo generation, where games were so hard that you'd just play them over and over again. But it didn't seem to be a problem to do that at the time.
Yeah, and the other thing too is those poor 64 people, like they just, you know what I mean? Like you were still renting games back then, you know what I mean? But like the fact that PlayStation gave people a taste, and a lot of the times, some of them were free demos and some of them were, part of a magazine subscription, but still like those
basically
demos,
free.
Yeah, basically free. Like those demos alone would help sell millions of copies of games.
Oh yeah.
It's insane. And then what's funny is sometimes people had the demo and didn't care to play the other. Like I remember getting the Tony Hawk demo and I was like, this is amazing. I'm having such a blast doing this. And I remember getting the rest of the levels and I was just like, these are okay, but Warehouse is still like the best level, right? And it's only because I played the hell out of it and I know how to do all the lines in the game perfect. And, it's just that same. And then same thing with Tony Hawk School 2. Like, the School 2 was amazing, and it was in a demo, and you could play it over and over and over. Metal Gear was amazing. I remember Tekken. I want to say it was Tekken 3 was on a demo disc. I played the hell out of that. Parappa the Rapper wouldn't have even touched that game if it wasn't for a demo disc. But yeah, man, like demo discs were such a good idea, and
it was pre-internet having video, so it was the only way to taste the game. You couldn't just pull up the YouTube link and see what it looks like or whatever it was, or even just watching a review wasn't a thing. Like now you can pull up, the new Assassin's Creed and watch a review, and you can see what the gameplay, the environment looks like in the review, and then you can decide whether you want it. But back then it was like, here's 3 or 4 screenshots in the magazine, and if that doesn't, like, one of them might be a cinematic and one of them might be gameplay, but whatever, like you had to kind of just guess, and the demos took that guessing away, because you could not only play games that you wanted to test and see if they were worth buying, but you get exposed to so many games that you wouldn't even think to play otherwise at all.
Right. No, and I mean, like that's, or you could do what 64 did and send out people VHS tapes, which is the most ridiculous shit I've ever heard ever. Like promotional VHS tapes of like Donkey Kong and Star Fox, like what? Like you guys sent out VHS tapes while people on PlayStation were actually playing the game.
Yeah.
Like the actual game, just a small chunk.
Yeah, I think PlayStation definitely won that generation.
Yeah, just a little bit. So I mean, did you at least have friends though that had like a 64 so you could go to their house and stuff and like experience all of it?
Yeah, I had a friend that I had kind of a bitter rivalry with, because that was in the prime of my console war phase, where it was very much like Nintendo sucks, PlayStation rocks, but we would still like want to go over and like I went to his house and he'd always be talking about GoldenEye, so I'd be like, okay, let's see what this is all about, and I'd go there and he'd unlocked like every single thing and beaten every level, and I could play that, and I could play WCW NWO Revenge, and
which was amazing,
which was really cool. And what else? Yeah, and I had a friend that had Mario Party, and I'd go there and play that, and it was something where you did want to have a friend that had the other console, no matter what.
You absolutely like it was. I'm not going to say it was a requirement, but like it was very much helpful, because, like I said, I wasn't well off to the point where I could have both, so you had to make a decision, one or the other. And you absolutely wanted to have the friend who had the other, so you can just go over there and play everything. But also, depending on the games you were in, because like Smackdown on PlayStation was cool, but like the N64 wrestling games were just better. Like they were so good. Like the WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy. You said WCW, NWO Revenge. And it's funny because like that and the WrestleMania games were the same company that made them, but just all of a sudden they lost the WCW license and like, hey, WWF, let's go. But like, again, look right there. Look at the WWF license being on 64 and PlayStation, how different those games were. Like, vastly different. Like, they were nowhere near the same. Anything. Completely different. Speed, character models, look, feel, controls. Like, everything was completely different. You can't do that shit now. Like, the only way you can do that now is if you go from, like, consoles to mobile. That's it. Like, you can't do that between consoles anymore.
Yeah, it's crazy. But even still, I remember playing so much of WWF Smackdown 2 Know Your Role. Like, there was a season mode in that game that I feel like hasn't been met. Like, hasn't been matched since then. And I haven't played every single wrestling game that's come out, but I played a lot of them. Like, I played them right up until kind of the PS3 generation and skipped a few. And I've played WWE 19 recently. But it had a story mode that was so dynamic, and because there was no voice acting, just text, they could do so much with it. And
there was head movement and text, just like
yeah. But like all you need was like, you know, the head movement, the text, and then Vince McMahon's music comes on and he walks out, and it's like, oh damn! Like, and there'd be huge moments and twists, and your character could feud with people, and it would actually feel real. Like, it felt like you'd want it to be. It wasn't like pre-scripted. It wasn't something like they do now where they have to kind of shape it to control it and kind of micromanage it. It actually felt like, and maybe some of it was my imagination of being younger, but like your character could get injured. They could go and you could make a dialogue option that chooses, yes, I'm going to go and film a movie like The Rock used to disappear for 6 months to make Scorpion King or whatever.
No, that was he was injured. He couldn't wrestle, but he could be in the movie, right?
That's right. But you could actually go and make a movie and come back in 6 months and everything's kind of different. Like, you know, there'd be different champions, and you could hold like 2 or 3 belts at once and walk out holding the 2 belts, and you could have a stable and they'd come out with you. And like, there was just so much you could do in this mode compared to, I guess, what we have now, which is, you know, everything's impressive and there's voice acting and whatever, but it's just not the same. I wish they could go back to that.
I think what happened is that they started, and I've thought about this. I think it's just they got to a point where they started doing too much creative shit. Create a wrestler, create a move, create a wrestler obviously was your base.
Yeah.
But then it was like, create a pay-per-view. Okay, that's cool. Create a ring, create an arena, and there was just like 900 creative things that you could do. And it's like, I get it. But when you give me some structure to like work with, like when you, instead of making me do everything and come up with the storylines myself, like I remember, I think it was that game that my buddy and I, we did like seasons of that game.
Yeah, like, it could go for years.
It could go forever. Yeah. And of course you were in perfect shape, even though it was year like 32 or some shit. Like you were still in immaculate shape. But, like it was so cool. And I think that was the game that me and my buddies, cause we were PlayStation kids, like we didn't have 64, like me and my buddies. And I think that was the game where we had our characters. You're right. It was just insane how well they did that game. But the wrestling games now, it's funny because I think it was 2K17 was like a Games with Gold game one month. And I was like, yes, I'm going to get that. I'm going to play it and we're going to have a blast just like back in the day. And I played it and I was like, it's okay. Like it's not terrible, but
it's not as accessible.
Again,
definitely.
And how weird is that? Because you'd imagine like we talked about how platformers aren't as good and now they've gotten better, and games progress and get better, but like those games seem to have been better then, and I don't know why.
I think it's because of what I said. Like there's so much more you can do now, whether it's like holding down a trigger and pressing a button instead of back then it was like X is punch, circles X is jump, and circles grapple, and squares punch, like triangle to run. And now there's like you get into a grapple and there's a heavy move, or you can reversal. You have to, it's timed reversals instead of just like tapping reverse constantly. You
reverse it 100,000 times because you could time it perfect back in the day. Like, oh my god,
yeah, it was so much fun and like completely unrealistic. It was it was like NBA Jam basically.
Yeah, basically
it was so much fun. And like there was I remember being so disappointed with the first Smackdown game on the PS3 because we had to buy a second memory card just to play it because the save file was like 4 meg or something, and there was only an 8 meg memory card back then. And the game was not good. Like the story mode, I mentioned how great the one in 2 was. In 3, it was a first person. You could roam around backstage and talk to characters, and
that seems weird.
That was how you would interact with them and start feuds and that kind of thing. And it just didn't work by comparison. And there was some, like, Here Comes the Pain was a really great one where they went back to the style that worked before that. But yeah, after that, I think it went to like the Raw versus SmackDown franchise.
Right, that's when it went there.
Yeah.
And that was also too on PS2, which was weird, is they had 3 separate games as well. So they had the WrestleMania series on GameCube, they had SmackDown on PlayStation, they had Raw on Xbox. But then, then they started doing the SmackDown versus Raw. Like, it was just really weird back then. But like, for whatever reason, those games seem to be just better. Maybe just go back. And it's funny because like there's some games that came out that were in the vein of those. So like Shovel Knight comes out and it's trying to get on the retro style of like, old games. There was the wrestling game that recently came out that literally was in the style of those old 64 wrestling games. And I was like,
the Fire Pro one?
I think that's what it is. Yeah, the Fire Pro. Yeah. I just thought that was hysterical because it's like, they knew everybody loved that 64 era of wrestling games. So like, let's just go make another one of those. Like, let's just go do that.
Smart.
And then, so obviously though, did you ever have a point in time when you really didn't play games much, or have games kind of been part of your life since you have gotten introduced to them?
There was a phase when I was at uni and I was catching up on a lot of old games, and I was kind of getting, I was 20 years old, but I was nostalgic, and I would be going back and playing LucasArts games on my PC and discovering emulators and going back and playing like Majora's Mask and Conker's Bad Fur Day, all these games that I'd missed growing up. It was also a time where, you're 20 years old, you're catching up on 50 years of popular music. So I'm listening to Led Zeppelin. And I guess it was just the age where I was at, where I was looking backwards rather than around me. And it was also the tail end of the PS2 generation where, I wasn't as engaged with what was coming out. And I missed a lot of games. Like I missed Shadow of the Colossus and a couple of those kinds of big releases that came out towards the end of the PS2. And a lot of my gaming was either that nostalgic stuff or multiplayer. So I'd be playing maybe like a soccer game like FIFA or NBA or something with my friends. But then we'd decide we wanted to play like Age of Empires on the LAN network, or we'd play like Smash Bros or Mario Kart on the 64, even though, this is like 2007, 2008 when the 64 is not it's not a current console by any stretch, but it's the one that we all remembered and loved. So it kind of brought everyone together. And that was probably my biggest stretch of not really being up with games, even though I would still play them. I wasn't consuming the news. I wasn't in the industry yet. I hadn't discovered IGN and beyond and the podcast world of games. And it was only when GTA 4 came out that I was like, okay, I know a guy with a PlayStation 3. I'm going to borrow his PS3 for the weekend. Nice. And I finished GTA 4 in like 4 days. I just played it for like a long weekend.
Nonstop.
I really did, in my dorm room at uni. And then, so that was, I don't know, it came out in like March or April or something, I think.
Yeah, it was a spring game for sure.
Yeah, and then my birthday was in October, and I was like, Metal Gear Solid 4 is coming out. I have to play it because that's a franchise that I've always been a fan of. And I'd always, like, through all the generations of consoles, that was always the game that kind of, how you talk about there's people that only play Call of Duty or they only play Madden or they wait for a Grand Theft Auto to come out. Like, that was, I guess at that point, that was me for Metal Gear Solid. So I was like, I'm getting a PS3 for my birthday so I can play GTA 4. And from there, I had a voucher. Someone said, check out this Fallout game. I never heard of Fallout. I got Fallout 3, and I had just graduated, so I was spending a lot of time by myself. I moved to like a new city, and it kind of became my like refuge and my escape from my work life and being a bit isolated because I didn't have a lot of friends in this place. Like, I wasn't completely a hermit, but you have to spend a lot of time by yourself. And Fallout 3, I must have put in like, 100-hour playthrough, new character, another 100 hours, DLC, the whole thing. And that was a game that I remember. It kind of opened my eyes to what games have become, because I'd missed a lot of the open world stuff.
Right.
Apart from GTA 4, obviously, and the GTAs before that, that was a game where I was like, okay, this is something that's not structured. You can do whatever you want. I love this. And that since then, that's kind of been my go-to style of game. I play everything. You know, I love platformers. I love sports games sometimes. Like I play NBA 2K every year. But, you know, your Red Deads and your Assassin's Creeds and that kind of thing, they're always kind of the ones that I can't resist.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some people, like you said, like you missed. The good thing though in your case is like you didn't, like you said, you didn't stop playing games. You just kind of stopped focusing on what was current and just kind of stuck back.
Yeah.
But then you could always go back and like, how much stuff did you miss? And you have all this stuff available for you to play. Yeah, GTA. You're right though. Like there are people out there when it comes to certain games that are just straight like, I don't play video games, but then like Grand Theft Auto happens, or Red Dead happens, or lately it's been Fallout. Call of Duty was a big one for a while there, where like that was more of an annual thing. Like, but people would buy, like you get those gamers that would have a 360, and like, what game do you play? Call of Duty. What other games do you have? Call of Duty.
FIFA.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like this like in the States, Madden's huge, so it's like Madden, Call of Duty. That's their staple. That's their yearly. That's what they buy.
Fortnite now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, dude, Fortnite's free. I'm sorry. It sounds bad. Yeah. Even if you don't play Fortnite, you should probably download it just because it's a fun game and you can dick around and it's free. Who cares? Think about this. A person can buy a Switch or a PS4, have Fortnite, and never pay another dime for a game.
Yeah.
And just enjoy the shit out of it. I would say you could do that on Xbox, but that's not true because Xbox is the only console that's being stupid right now and has to pay for online or free-to-play games to play online. Figure that shit out, Phil Spencer, because that's one of those weird like black eyes that's just dumb now. Like just like back in the day, you had to have gold for Netflix, and obviously he got rid of that. But like, okay, guys, let's get rid of gold for Fortnite. But no, like you can literally buy a PS4. Do not buy a game anymore because like when I worked at the game, I worked at a video game store, and like. You get those people all the time that would come in, buy a console, and not buy a game. And I'm like, are you going to go home and fucking stare at this thing at the wall? Like, what are you going to do? Like, you got to buy something.
Demo disc, man.
Again, demo discs were kind of like the Fortnite back then because you're like, this is free. I can kind of screw around with this for a while. But I mean, I was like, dude, what are you going to do? Are you going to stare at but now you can literally buy a PS4 and literally buy no online subscription, no disc for a game, go home, download Fortnite, and have a lot of fun.
Yeah, and a lot of other games too.
And there are a lot of other games too. I mean, like, you know, like I know Warframe is another one that's a huge free-to-play game. DC Universe Online is free-to-play. Like, now you don't have to get to the point where you even buy games, but, you know, the way Fortnite still made over $1 billion in in-game revenue, I mean, obviously people are still, I've spent money towards it, so good for them. As long as you make a good game. That's the other thing too, is like, demo discs started going away, but then demos started happening online, and now you have betas. But now the whole beta thing's the whole time thing. Like, very rarely do demos actually happen anymore. Like, now it's like, here's a beta, but it's not going to work, obviously, once the game comes out. Like, we're not going to do that. So, I mean, they still do it. Like I said, sometimes occasionally I'll see, like, demo available for, like, Forza Horizon 4, and I'm like, well, that's cool. It's like a demo. It's not a beta. Because now a beta is just a glorified demo, but like demos actually still exist occasionally. So I'm like, good for you guys. But now free to play has gotten to the point where, you know, it's a demo, but it's an actual full game. So it's really fun. So obviously, how are your gaming habits like now? Obviously, you've gotten to a point though where it's part of, you know, not just like a fun hobby, but I mean, you're actually writing articles for IGN. You have your own podcast. You're like writing articles for other websites. Like, it's not like now. It's not just like it's a cool little hobby thing. And like you said, your mom was like super proud of you and like, holy shit, games aren't just like some toy thing he's doing for fun. Like, so what are your gaming habits like today?
So it's complicated because it's basically like watching TV for me. Like, I get home. You know, if my wife's on a late shift, I'm like, okay, gonna put in some game time, get some work done. But really, it's just how much can I get through Red Dead before she gets home, or whatever it is. You know, it's it's a thing that I always like to have a game to play. And if there's a lull, I'm like, okay, I guess I better get some work done that's not to do with games. But I pretty much like mostly play single player campaigns in narratives. That's something that I really like, is the story in a game. And whether it's a platformer or an open world game or whatever, like I tend to steer away from online experiences because I don't like relying on friends or strangers to be ready to play when I want to play, or to, you know, for me to have uninterrupted time if there are other things going on. I don't like having to pause, and like, you can't pause, I guess. So you get yourself into trouble. You've got kids and a wife, so you know what that's like, you know.
100%. Yeah.
So I guess it's never felt like the way that I want to play a game. So being a PlayStation guy, you know, I feel like it's you know, a golden age of single player narratives, and with your God of War and your Last of Us and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I really love that kind of thing. And I guess it's about just, relaxing and having a good time and being able to talk about it with friends and compare experiences. Like Red Dead is really, I think it might be my game of the year at the moment, as much as I love Detroit and I love God of War, and it's been a really good year with Celeste as well. But I think Red Dead, I'm only like halfway through it, but there's so much to talk about, and you know, you can't spoil things, so you got to wait till everyone else is finished. But
that's the type of game that so many people aren't going to finish at the same time. Like that game is so big. Like some people could. How are we supposed to do like a spoiler
podcast, like talk about spoilers if people aren't going to finish it for 6 months? But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like that's the other thing, and I'm right there with you though, because I mean, for example, my time to play games is extremely limited. We talked about it earlier today how I haven't played much of Red Dead, not because I don't want to, it's because my gaming chunks are like 30 minutes. And you can't do shit in any open world like Red Dead or Fallout or Witcher in 30 minutes. So you have to find those games that you can get the quick in and out. The multiplayer side of things, for me, I am with you though, right? I enjoy multiplayer games. However, I enjoy a multiplayer game where I'm not feeling like I have to play with friends to have fun, right?
Sure.
You know, like Fortnite, for example, I can get into a solo game, screw around for 30 minutes, and have fun. Like, I really don't care. But I have certain games that, like, I do want to, like, have a group of people to play with, and I still have, like, a core group of guys. For the longest time, my buddy Jared and I, he lives in Illinois, where I used to live. It's about a 2-hour time difference. And when he got off of work and I got off work was around the same time, and both of our significant others weren't around at the time. So we literally had like an hour to about 2 hours each day to play Halo 5. And we did that for like a year straight. And it was awesome because, like I said, that was our way of like relaxing and bonding and just like de-stressing and like, yo, what's up? Like, I wouldn't talk to him as often if it wasn't for us playing games together. But like I said, like, that was like, you know, certain games I get into a mode where like I'll play online with buddies and it'll be cool, but then there's modes where I just like, I don't have time to do it. So I'm looking at the single player games, and I'm also looking at single player games. I'm like, how long is this game? 10 hours? Awesome. That's great. Dude, when I saw Tomb Raider was 12 hours long, I was so happy. I was like, yes, I could probably go through this game and beat it and have fun. And, you know, it's cool. But then you get the games like Fallout 76 that's staring at me, and I'm like, I don't even want to hit the start button. Like, I don't, because I just don't think I'm gonna do the game justice. Like, and that's kind of like, I was stupid and started Assassin's Creed. I was dumb. I've played 20 minutes of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I'm like, this game's great. Why'd I even do this when Red Dead's coming out? Like, why did I do that to myself? I'm not gonna have time to beat this before. And that's the reason why I didn't get Spider-Man, is because Tomb Raider had like a deal where if you bought it, you got a $10 certificate at Best Buy and like all this shit. So I bought Tomb Raider over Spider-Man, not saying Spider-Man was bad. It's just Tomb Raider was cheaper, and I was thinking, 12 hours, I can get through that. Hoping Spider-Man would be on sale for Black Friday. It's not anywhere, and it kind of bums me out, but that's okay.
I'm sure you'll get it when you have time to play it.
And again, here's the other thing too, is like,
it'll be cheaper by the time you're ready to play it.
Again, yeah, that's the whole thing. Like, for example, you know what I'm going to do right now for this Black Friday upcoming? I'm going to buy Resident Evil 7 Gold Edition for $17.
Yeah.
And it has all the DLC and everything with it. So, I mean, it's like certain games, I'm not one of those where I feel I have to buy everything day one, because I know I won't play everything day one. I won't have the time to. So sometimes I'll just wait. And Spider-Man's going to have 2 DLCs out by the end of the year. So should I just wait to the point now where there's some Game of the Year edition and just get it then? That's probably what I'll end up doing. But I told myself, I'm like, Resident Evil 7 looks great. Like, it looks really cool. I'm glad people like it. I just don't have time to play it right now. I'll pick it up when it's cheap. And I literally saw a Black Friday ad, $17. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. So, and again, a good game is still going to be good later. It's not like games lose it's not like they go rotten or anything. They're still good. Like, Spider-Man a year from now is still going to be an awesome game. So just pick it up and play it when I can. So,
that's it.
Well, if people wanted to check you out on the internet, where would they go and find all of that?
Sure. So every social media, I'm pretty much at Jono himself, Jono, and you can check out my podcast, Puttin In Work. It comes out every Wednesday for American listeners, Thursday over here. And that's basically just an interview podcast where I talk to different people every week about creative work. There's often people from the games industry, people like, the kind of funny guys, people from IGN and game developers. I just had Yug, who runs PAX all over the world, and I've got some voice actors on there who I got to talk to at PAX, Sissy Jones and Courtney Taylor, and I often talk to comedians, musicians, pretty much anyone that does cool stuff about their advice to get into their industry and their creative work and the work that happens behind the scenes to get where they are. So that's my main jam, and that keeps me pretty busy.
All right, and if anybody wants to check out any of the things he does, I'll have links in the show notes for all of the above. So, dude, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing all of your stories with me, man. I really do appreciate it.
That's all right, man. I've got plenty more stories, so if you ever need a repeat guest, I'm sure I could pull some of those out too.
Well, I'm sure we could do a podcast just about Smackdown 2 story mode. Like,
oh man,
we could just do that.
Yeah, you could edit out what we said about it today and just do like a full hour on it.
There we go. We could do that. It'll be the second episode. So
there you go.
All right, thanks, man.
No worries.
All right, and again, thank you, Jono, for being on the show. If you guys want to follow him on Twitter, go ahead and follow him at Jono, and that's Jono himself. Also, of course, he has his own podcast, Puttin In Work Podcast, so feel free to take a listen to that, especially if you're a Kind of Funny best friend. You may already know about it, but if not, he's had some pretty amazing guests on the show, especially from the Kind of Funny community. So definitely check out that show as well. If you guys want to be on the show just like he was, go ahead and send me a tweet at MitchPower1116 on Twitter, or at the podcast Twitter page, which is at GUG Podcast on Twitter. Of course, we also have the Facebook group for Growing Up Gaming, and on YouTube, you can just search up GUG Podcast and check out the show there as well. If you guys want to go ahead and leave me a review on iTunes, let me know. I guess the 5-star thing is cool. I'm not going to make you lie, you know what I mean? But if you want to make it a 5-star review on iTunes, I appreciate it. Share it with your friends. Make sure everybody gets the word out so that way everybody can come on the show and share their stories. And again, thank you guys so much for returning. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys next week with another new episode. See ya.